Hi, my name is Yasmin Terehi. I recently completed my 2-month transformational leadership program, and the results were powerful. If you want to live an exciting life and fulfill your highest potential in 2023 and beyond, I have an incredible opportunity for only a few more individuals to join the next cohort. I will personally be coaching a small group on how to discover and clear your limiting beliefs, how to manage your energy instead of your time, how to tap into the power of your intuition, and how to use discernment so that you can start living a life full of ease, abundance, and flow. As someone who has helped countless entrepreneurs and CEOs open doors of possibility they never thought existed, I can tell you that this strategy will completely transform your life. Best part, you'll 10x your output and unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly to overcome your limiting beliefs and transform that into a new self-concept. I'll teach you how to create clarity, systems, and processes, and I'll also help you develop your intuition. You'll get access to some of the best material that will also help you manage your energy, and you'll get access to guided meditations that are not available anywhere else. This method is so effective. If you'd like to join the waitlist, you can find the link in the show notes or navigate to www.yasminterehi.com/gateways-to-awakening/. Hi, my name is Yasmin Terehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, consciousness, and spirituality. Today's episode is with Dr. Eben Alexander, who was an academic neurosurgeon for over 25 years, including 15 years at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, Children's Hospital, and Harvard Medical School in Boston. He experienced a transcendental near-death experience called NDE during a week-long coma from an inexplicable brain infection that completely transformed his worldview. He's a pioneering scientist and a modern thought leader in the emerging science that acknowledges the primacy of consciousness in the universe. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, Proof of Heaven, The Map of Heaven, and Living in a Mindful Universe, which is the sequel to his book. And you can find him at www.ebenalexander.com. So welcome to the show, Eben.
Well, Yasmin, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be with you today.
Likewise. So to kick it off, Eben, what does it mean to have a near-death experience, as they're called, NDE?
Okay, well, the near-death experience is something that's been around for thousands of years, although it was first really kind of identified and named in 1975 by Raymond Moody in his book, Life After Life. But basically, it's when someone comes close to death through either trauma, heart attack, or some other issue that threatens their life. Then they have an experience that indicates in many ways that there's much more going on to this than just, when you die, everything blacks out and that's the end of it. In fact, people have extraordinary journeys in these kind of near-death experiences where often you hear descriptions of traversing through tunnels from darkness into lightness, encountering souls of departed loved ones, coming into a review of one's life where you relive, not just remember, but revisit and relive some of the main aspects of one's life. I would say that life review is there in about 25 to 50% of NDEs in the modern literature. Often encounter different realms, a completely different kind of temporal ordering, a divine being, a God force, things like that are often described. So they're basically an NDE is just an example of kind of the grander aspects of our being and existence that is not normally apparent to us in our daily lives in the material world, but certainly can come to the fore in very dramatic fashion around the time of events that might lead to our bodily death. And that's really where the action is about this, because it answers one of the most ancient questions of humanity, which is what happens when we die. And what we find from NDEs is it's kind of an extraordinary realm showing us that we don't cease to exist. And I think that's why NDEs are so important to our modern culture.
Mm. Wow. So, and you had the experience of a NDE, and what was it like for you? Can you talk to us about your experience?
Well, yes, it was. It's important to point out that, for one thing, the experience I'm going to describe completely violates the main principles of modern neuroscience. And so it basically would be impossible to occur according to the tenets of modern neuroscience. And that has to do with the documented damage to my brain. A very important, kind of unusual feature of my near-death experience is that I was amnesic, that I had absolutely no memory of Eben Alexander's life, no knowledge of humans, this earth. I really had an empty slate. And that was my condition for the entire 7 days of my coma, during which I had this profound spiritual experience. The amnesia was important for some of the deepest lessons I was to learn, but it is not a common feature of NDEs. Most NDEers go into this process with full memory and knowledge of who they were in their earthly life. I did not have that advantage, but it became clear to me over months and years afterwards that amnesia was absolutely crucial for some of the deepest lessons that I was to learn. Now, to very briefly describe the experience, because we could do that over many hours and still not do it justice, but very briefly, it started in what I call the earthworm eye view, a primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm. It was like being in dirty jello. I remember a strong sense of feeling of roots, blood vessels, things like that around me, but I had no sense of body awareness at any point. And as I said, I had a complete amnesia for this universe. And that was very important for the way things unfolded there in terms of their revelations to me. In that earthworm eye view, I felt like it went forever because I didn't have a memory moment to moment, a passage of time. But there didn't come a point where I was diverted and basically rescued from that earthworm eye view by a slowly spinning white light. And that light came to me as kind of a spinning melody. So there was a beautiful kind of sound associated with this brilliant, clear light. And it came towards me and it opened like a rip in the fabric of that ugly earthworm eye view realm and led up into this rich, ultra real gateway valley. And the Gateway Valley was really an intersection point for Earth and the spiritual realms. It was much more real than this world. I mean, the Gateway Valley is where things like our life reviews would occur. And a life review, again, is very importantly, is not just kind of a vague remembering of events, but it's a powerful, detailed, alive reliving of events. And it can all happen at once. That's the important thing. You're in a realm that is so extraordinary that you can go through all the events of your life simultaneously and not be confused by that whole process, and yet glean deep lessons that are the purpose of a life review to help modify our course. And to teach us deep things about our existence. Now, in that Gateway Valley, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There were millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations, colors beyond the rainbow. Below us was this beautiful meadow surrounded by a rich green forest. It was all like Plato's world of ideals. It was a perfect world. There was no sign of any death or decay. I have very vivid memories of blossoms, buds, flowers, all opening in this rich and dynamic and lively fashion, extreme fertility, fecundity. I mean, just an amazingly beautiful realm that goes beyond any kind of worldly description. And of course, when I've already described how your life review, every event of your life can pass before your eyes simultaneously and instantaneously, and yet you make sense of it in that realm, tells you that you're not in Kansas anymore when you're in that kind of a space. It's much more dramatic and kind of interconnected with all the features of life and all of our fellow beings and all. That's why life reviews can happen there and can be so kind of instructive in teaching us about how to live. And the life review, it's very important to point out, shows you also that the boundaries of self are really a fiction, because so many people who've had life reviews describe them as you experience the events of your life with other people, the interactions, but from their emotional perspective. not your own. That's the important thing to understand, is that the life review in many ways is revealing to us that our sense of self and isolation from the rest of, sentient beings and of this, the mental aspects of this universe is just not true. And we can learn much more about that overlap through these kind of experiences, and especially when we meditate and do other things to try and bring these experiences to life. Even if you've never had an NDE, much of the work that Karen and I do now are meditation workshops where we teach people to have some of the ingredients of an NDE that can transform their life, to give them the same transformative benefits. Now, in this Gateway Valley, I was not alone. There was a beautiful guardian angel, my spiritual companion. And of course, when I came back from all this, she was the deep mystery to it all, because that central spiritual guide, I came to realize when I read NDE literature after my coma, because I'd never paid any attention to that literature before my coma, because I thought it was all just hallucinations. I didn't realize that it was instructing us about a very real aspect of human existence. So that, in that Gateway Valley, that beautiful guardian angel, I think she gave me the ultimate message that I was to bring back to this world. And I think it's the central message of proof of heaven, really, to each and every one of us. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are deeply loved. And that was really the message I got from her. And she never said a word. It was delivered to me telepathically, which is, of course, the way everything works in that world. You know knowledge through identification. You become major aspects of the scene that you're witnessing, all in an effort to instruct you about some of these deeper lessons about our existence and how we should really treat each other and view ourselves and treat ourselves. So, and in that Gateway Valley, as we've said, it's really just a gateway. That was not my final terminus in the heavenly realms, in the spiritual realms. Because what then happened was I realized that all this beautiful growth and festivity, I witnessed thousands of beings down below in the meadow that were dancing, lots of joy and merriment, children playing, dogs jumping, incredible festivities, all being fueled up above by these swooping orbs of pure angelic beings, these perfect kind of spheres of spiritual beings that I later labeled, when I wrote it all up weeks later, angelic choirs. And they were emanating chants and anthems, hymns that would just thunder through my awareness. And I remember at this point in the journey witnessing what I refer to in my writings as the divine wind, or the breath of God. And that was that soft summer breeze that blew through and was my first awareness of the divine, of the power of that God force, the binding force of love throughout every bit of this, an intelligence that is far greater than human intelligence, that's a creative source of the universe, and yet is also deeply involved in loving this creation. And in many ways, when one is in that realm, you start to absorb and bathe in that love of the creator for the creation. And that was, to me, one of the most astonishing features of this. Now, it turns out, though, that my presence in that or in the Gateway Valley, as we've said, was only a stepping stone. And so those angelic choirs that were swooping above and providing such incredible fuel to the joy and festivities of that spiritual realm, they provided yet another musical portal leading up to higher and higher levels. I remember all of four-dimensional space-time collapsing down, then all of a very different temporal ordering of things in that spiritual realm, which I call deep time or meta time, which allows for things like life reviews to occur. So that, for example, you can go through that whole life review and it shows you everything from birth to death and everything in between, all the important points, and yet it's not as if that is following Earth time. You're outside of Earth time. And that's a very important point here. To understand any of these deeper concepts, you have to realize that time flow in that spiritual realm is a much more primordial flow of causal chain of events than what we view as Earth time in this world.
Wow.
And so seeing all of that collapse down, including that spiritual realm, that Gateway Valley, as I ascended through this portal that was provided by the angelic choirs to higher and higher levels, all the way to what I call the core. The core was infinite inky blackness. It was filled to overflowing with that divine God force of love. It was absolutely a true spiritual home. One could not feel more at home than in that beautiful place of existence. And of course, as I describe all this, I realize the words may sound foreign to people, but the important thing to stress is our spiritual home is very obvious to us when we are in that those levels of the spiritual realm. So it is absolutely nothing to fear. And when we go in with love in our heart and wanting to do the very best and highest and good for all involved, that love is what protects us and kind of basically aligns us with the highest purposes of the universe. Now, that core realm, every time I entered it, I was told, not in words, but in pure conceptual flow, you're not here to stay, you'll be going back, but we'll teach you many things. And in fact, what would happen is I would just tumble back down to that earthworm eye view. But I learned very quickly by remembering the musical notes of the melody that could take me back up into these beautiful spiritual realms. And I went through that journey many times of traversing these realms. But then there came a point where, just as they promised me in the core that I wasn't there to stay, I could no longer conjure up the musical melody to take me up there. And so I was now stuck in that earthworm eye view realm where it all started. But the interesting thing is, very quickly, I had an experience where there were thousands of beings around me going off in the distance with heads bowed, many holding candles, and their nurturing energy was comforting and bringing me back towards something. I didn't know what. But that was a beautiful part of the experience because so far I had thought that only in those highest realms, the Gateway Valley and the core, could one encounter that deep sense of a spiritual home and the comforting, loving oneness. And yet now I was feeling it at these lowest levels. And that was also accompanied by the appearance of six faces that would appear to me. They'd come up out of the muck, say a few words that I didn't understand, then they disappear again. And those faces were very important because they were of people, friends and family who were there the last 24 hours of coma. But notably, no one who had been present earlier in the week was apparent to me. And what that told me was that the vast majority of my coma journey had to happen between days 1 and 4 or 1 and 5 of this experience. And I go into all the timing of that and the evidence for that in the book Proof of Heaven and in the follow-up Living in a Mindful Universe to more fully discuss all that. And it was the sixth phase of those that really got my attention. It was of a 10-year-old boy. Now, my amnesia was still very much in play, and I didn't recognize him, but that was my son, my 10-year-old son, Bond. They had protected him from the worst news during most of this week, but now during day 7, it was a Sunday morning, the doctors held a family conference where they said I'd gone from 10% chance of survival down to 2% with no chance of recovery. And that's when they had this family discussion that it was time to let me go, to stop medical support and just let me die. And Bond overheard that outside the room, and he knew now that things were much worse than he'd been told. That's when he came running down the hallway, opened my eyelids, and one eye looking far left, the other far right, neither pupil working. I promise you, that's a terrible picture for anyone in medicine. And I didn't recognize him, but he was pleading with me, Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. I didn't understand the words, but that pleading I sensed across all these realms, I had to come back. And that's what was my impetus to come back to this world. And I was able to will my way back through that extreme love for him, even not knowing who he was. But even as I woke up in that ICU bed on day 7 of coma, my mother, my sisters, my sons at the bedside, I did not even recognize them. That's how destroyed my brain was by this illness. And yet my memories and my cognition came back very rapidly, literally over hours and days. In fact, all of my semantic knowledge returned over about 2 months or so. That is the miracle of my story, as is pointed out in a medical case report by 3 doctors not involved in my care that came out in September 2018, Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases. And that case report makes it very clear that the case I made in Proof of Heaven, which they made much more strongly because they had a lot more objective data in my medical records to go through. They made it clear that my brain could not have produced any kind of dream or hallucination, much less the most fantastic, detailed, memorable, alive, and vivid experience I've ever been through in my life. How could that happen when the medical details of my case so clearly showed that my brain was inactivated during that time? That's really why my story has become such a gift to the scientific community and to the world at large, is because of the deep medical details that show no way that this could have been a hallucination or a dream, because those parts of my brain were completely inactivated by that process. But that just gives you kind of a very brief thumbnail sketch of what the journey was like.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I mean, that is phenomenal. And just my heart just blasted open as you were speaking about this, just because it's so beautiful. So I want to talk a little bit about the chances of recovery. I know you mentioned, the chances were extremely low, and you went from having amnesia to not remembering to then like being able to kind of come back to your full self and integrate that experience. What were the chances of recovery given your state? And like, can you talk a little bit about the validation from some of the doctors that confirmed that this, could not have been a dream or a hallucination or imagination? I just want to set that context before we move on to,
Right.
yeah.
Well, my case has been discussed in many, many, many places, in many books on NDEs. In fact, Bruce Greyson's book After, which is his basically memoir and autobiography about his 45 years of investigating NDEs as a skeptical scientist, his whole chapter 10 is devoted to my case. So there's a lot of discussion out there. There are plenty of places you can encounter that. But the starting point for your question is really that medical case report. In the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, September 2018, Dr. Serbi Khanna, Lauren Moore, and Bruce Greyson. And they make it very clear, two major points of their case study. One is that my brain was far too damaged for me to have had any kind of dream or hallucination. And that's a very important point. But even more important in some sense is my recovery. It's really unprecedented in the medical literature. In fact, when this case report was presented to the peer review editors at the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, they said, well, this case is absurd. There's really nothing like it in the literature in terms of recovery from, more than a week in coma due to gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis with a rapid descent into coma. So how do you explain it? And the three doctors responded, who wrote the report, said, well, it's because he had a near-death experience that this miraculous recovery was enabled. I mean, in so many words, that was kind of the message. And that was good enough for the scientific peer review editors. They said, okay. They knew of other cases like that. For example, Anita Morjani's story is told in Dying to Be Me, where she basically had a stage 4 lymphoma, was within hours of death, deep coma, and she had a profound near-death experience and came back to this world knowing her cancer would disappear, and it did. And she's alive and well today. That all happened in February 2006. Or Dr. Mary C. Neal, the orthopedic surgeon who had a profound near-death experience kayaking in Chile in the late 1990s, over 30-minute warm water drowning. You don't just come back from that, but they brought her to the surface dead. They resuscitated her. She ended up having a full recovery, went back to work as an orthopedic surgeon, and has gone around, as I have. I presented with her before, the spiritual journey, the NDE. So really, it's a deep lesson to all of us that as we come to acknowledge more readily our spiritual essence and our connection to a spiritual center of the universe, whatever you want to call it. You can call it God or Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit. I don't care what words you use, but don't pretend that by labeling it, you own it. And realize that experience is what near-death experiencers of that God force is something that more than 90% of near-death experiencers report. And they don't come back more religious. They come back more spiritual. But the important point, certainly for the religious community, is that if 90% of NDEers have had an experience that proves to them the reality of God, then maybe we should all take that concept a little more seriously. And I feel that people can come to this kind of knowledge through meditation and centering prayer. You don't have to have your own NDE, but Ken Ring has written extensively about how just knowledge of NDEs out in a culture can greatly help to awaken that culture to the transformative benefits that NDEs offer those who have them.
Wow. So this is incredible. And Eben, I want to talk a little bit about your experience in that state. You call it the Gateway Valley. And there's so many rich kind of points of view that you mentioned in that space about time. And I'm curious, what from your perspective is the meaning of life, after having gone through that experience? Why do you think that we are here then if if we're just, are we supposed to just like learn our lessons? Like, have you come up with a point of view on that?
Well, I think we're participating in many ways with the universe in a form of self discovery. So it's almost like that great kind of God force at the core of the universe loves this evolving story and is learning from it. So we're all contributing basically to the transformation and evolution of consciousness itself. And I would say that ultimately that's kind of the bigger picture. But to look at it as an individual human being, we're really coming to a deeper understanding of our relationship with the universe. And that also deeply involves a sense of meaning and purpose to that relationship. And that's what I think is most valuable to all of us. And that's what can bring us into healing and wholeness and kind of full soul growth in this life, is to acknowledge this much kind of grander aspect of our being, our interconnectedness, and that we're really here to learn about these lessons of love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, when necessary, forgiveness, but a whole set of tools that instruct us about how best to live and function in our lives so that we most fully take advantage of our presence here on earth in terms of growing towards that oneness with the divine, which I think is ultimately where all this is leading.
So, why do you say in your book that we're sharing one mind? Can you speak a little bit about this point?
Well, it's mainly because in the 14 years since my coma, I've been working with scientists around the world. And if people want to learn more about that, you can go to GalileoCommission.org. You can go to scientificandmedical.net. These are sites run by hundreds of scientists around the world who are deeply interested in the mind brain connection and the nature of consciousness, the very nature of reality. And so I've been working with these scientists in the 14 years since my coma, trying to come to a deeper understanding of how my experience could happen. Basically, that's what I was looking for, was a deeper explanation of why I experienced what I did during that week in coma. And what I can tell you is the giant dominance of information is leading to the concept that we are all sharing one consciousness. We're sharing one mind. And most of us think, well, my mental space is isolated from everybody else's. I'm not aware of them; they're not aware of mine, etc. And yet, scientists in laboratories studying this stuff have, for example, explored telepathy quite extensively and found that, yes, telepathy is very real. In fact, something like 35% of identical twins have very strong telepathic experiences through their life. So don't deny the reality of telepathy. It's a huge part of what we are and who we are. And then when you look at near-death experiences, what you find is this tremendous overlap of mind that occurs when people are in the process of leaving their physical body in the dying process. And when their mind is thus liberated, for example, in Anita Moorjani's story, she was aware of her brother flying from India to Hong Kong to be there for her death and funeral. And she had a mental overlap with him during that journey, knowing what he was doing, what he was going through, where he was, and what he thought he understood about the situation. And likewise, she also had a communication with her father, who had already passed from the physical world, and yet she connected with his soul. So, in other words, we find that consciousness overlaps. We have shared experience with loved ones, and it goes beyond that. And then, of course, when you get into tremendous scientific literature on things like reincarnation, and for people who are not aware, go to uvadops.org. That's University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies. That's only one group, but it's a major scientific group that studied reincarnation, past life memories in children for more than 6 decades. They have more than 2,700 cases. And of those, they have 1,700 cases that are what they call solved. That is, that they actually identified the person who lived before that is described by the child. And when you realize that this is not just some kind of wishful thinking, this is a rigorously scientifically studied material of Ian Stevenson, and now Jim Tucker is the head of all that. And if you go to uvadops.org, you'll find a tremendous amount of scientific evidence for the reality of consciousness in a much bigger sense than just individual consciousness, that we're really sharing one mind. And in fact, I would say that there was a recent contest run by Robert Bigelow out in Arizona. He's an aerospace engineer, but the contest was to answer the question, what's the best scientific evidence for survival of conscious awareness beyond permanent bodily death? And they received 29 essays to answer that question. I won't go into the long story of it because it's amazing, but those 29 essays are available to the reading public for free right now at bigelowinstitute.org. But the reason I bring all this up is because the second winning paper there by Dr. Pim van Lommel, a very scientific paper of supporting the reality of the afterlife, but at the end of his paper, he's making the same argument that we make in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, for the one mind hypothesis. And he lists 4 major resources for that hypothesis. And that is really where the science is headed on this, is that we're all sharing one mind, and we need to understand better how that works. But the resources that he listed for the one mind hypothesis, one is a beautiful book by Larry Dossey called One Mind. The other is a book by Steve Taylor called Spiritual Science. The other is a paper by Bernardo Kastrup in the Scientific Literature. I think it's Journal of Consciousness Studies, 2018. It's called The Universe in Consciousness. And then finally, he recommends our book, Living in Mindful Universe, as the 4th major resource supporting this notion of the one mind. It's really where the scientific community is headed in this whole discussion. Objective idealism is kind of the formal philosophical position, but it simply acknowledges, as we learn from quantum physics, from neuroscience, philosophy of mind, all the evidence for non-local consciousness and parapsychology, we learn that consciousness is primary in the universe. It's fundamental. It's not created by the brain, but our brain serves as a filter that allows that primordial mind to come into our awareness. And that's where the scientific understanding currently is in trying to come to a deeper understanding of all this. But the answer to all these biggest questions is really that we're sharing one mind. And then we just need to figure out how it's kind of parceled out through processes of dissociation into apparent individual minds and things like that. But ultimately, the scientific answer to the question, and where everybody is now circling the wagons to come to deeper understanding, is one of objective idealism or the primacy of mind.
Wow. So, Eben, what about, science and spirituality seems to be so at odds with each other. And it looks like obviously science is now confirming a lot of these ideas and concepts. But I'm curious, why are there so many modalities of science that are at odds with some of this work, even if it has been sort of rigorously studied and shared in journals? Like there's still, I would say from like a kind of mainstream perspective, there's still, it feels like it still hasn't hit kind of the wider audience.
People often say that science and spirituality are at kind of loggerheads with each other. And yet the deep truth is I do not believe that science or spirituality can properly move forward without the other. And I think that is something that many of these scientists are coming to agree with. And when I use the word spirituality here, to me, it doesn't have to have any kind of religious ingredient at all, but it should include really 2 main concepts. One is this one mind concept that, in fact, through our mental space, we're connected with the universe in a very profound fashion. And the other is this sense of meaning and purpose that is shared. And for me, that's a perfect working definition of spirituality to move forward. And it turns out that when you encounter things like quantum physics, one of the deepest lessons from quantum physics is really the primacy of mind. And yet, our materialist science has been so resistant to admitting anything to consciousness or spirit, soul, what have you, that they've basically hamstrung themselves to be unable to properly interpret the empirical data from the experiments to come to a proper conclusion. And so, in other words, to more fully understand the deep and profound answer to the measurement paradox in quantum physics, which has engendered something like 16 major interpretations in an attempt to understand it, and yet none of them are accepted by the physics community. And in many ways, as we move forward, and especially with this acknowledgement in the year 2022 with the Nobel Prize being given to 3 scientists whose work 30 and 40 years ago proved the reality of entanglement. That is, that the universe is connected in many ways outside of space and time that go beyond our general understanding, but in ways that can be readily demonstrated in the experiments. And that is really where the action is, because quantum physics itself is telling us that mind is primary in the universe. This is something the founding fathers of quantum physics all commented on, like Wolfgang Pauli, Max Planck, Erwin Schrödinger, Pascual Jordan, and others all talked about how mind seemed to be fundamental in the universe. But we've come a long way since their work. And that long way includes not only work in quantum physics, but also advances in neuroscience, advances in philosophy of mind, and advances in parapsychology with all the evidence for non-local consciousness. And all of this contributes to a much bigger answer about explaining the mind-brain connection and the nature of reality in a sense that acknowledges we're spiritual beings in a spiritual universe that is interconnected through this mental layer of mind. And that's where I think we can finally start to move forward. And for anyone out there in the scientific community who wants to learn more about this, certainly our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, is a great consolidation of a lot of this scientific effort and thinking. But also for the rigorous scientific mind, I would highly recommend the trilogy of books from the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, edited by Dr. Ed Kelly. The books Irreducible Mind, Beyond Physicalism, and Consciousness Unbound. And those three books, written from 2007 through 2021, provide an extraordinary example of scientific and philosophical discourse that supports this evolving notion of the primacy of mind in the universe. And it really is, an exciting time in the scientific community, because I think we're making tremendous progress at a more rapid fashion than we have in decades, that helps us to move towards understanding more deeply this objective idealism, which in some ways I would say you could go all the way, depending on your definitions of God and consciousness, to claiming what's known as evolutionary panentheism. And that is panentheism, just the notion that God force is really in all of us, that spirit is what runs this, that it's all ultimately the result of top-down causality from the mental realm. And the word evolutionary is what brings to the fore free will, and that we truly have free will, because in fact, materialist science is so mistaken over all this that they would argue that you do not have free will at all, that your conscious awareness is an illusion, that's an epiphenomenon of chemical reactions and electron fluxes in the brain. And they completely miss this deep and profound revolution of objective idealism and panentheism that is really taking over the philosophical world in major ways because of all this evidence,
Right.
like from NDEs and other spiritually transformative experiences.
So, Eben, how do you think that the world would, act knowing that, you talked about reincarnation, knowing that our souls continue on and that we are, in fact, sharing this one mind? Like, how do you think the world would show up if we all knew this?
Well, I think the main answer to that question comes from observing near death experiences. Near death experiences, by and large, are telling this story of our interconnectedness, of the binding force of love, of that God force being at the core of our very awareness. And so, in many ways, near death experiences take us to the next level of understanding. And once you realize they're not hallucinations, which is what the modern scientific community is finally realizing, and that's where groups like GalileoCommission.org and scientificandmedical.net are very important, because they emphasize and analyze the scientific framework that's evolving to support all of this reality of the primacy of mind. And that's where I think the world can become a far more peaceful and harmonious place. You got to realize that the damage done by our false sense of separation that comes out of materialist thought in a scientific sense is very deadly and damaging. And I would say that, for example, our addiction to fossil fuels, the corporate greed in the oil industry that's led to such damage to the climate with burning of carbon fuels, plastic pollution in the ocean and rivers, air pollution, things like that. These are all examples of a false sense of separation of humanity believing that it's all about stripping resources from the earth and getting the most benefit one can for oneself, as opposed to realizing that we're really in this to help each other and help this world at large. And that broader kind of outward focus on helping everyone, including the least, the last, and the lost, I think is a very important kind of statement of where this world needs to head, away from warfare and violence and conflict, which are the direct results of the false sense of separation inherent in materialism, and more to a unified kind of quantum informed view of the nature of reality, in which we're all in this together. We're really here to manifest that love that is so apparent to people in near death experiences and in the life review. That sense of love is really something we need to bring back to this world. In many ways, I view it as a love of the creator for the creation. But ultimately, since all of us are part of that creation, it involves bringing back love and kindness and compassion into all of our lives and our dealings with self and others.
Wow. So I want to talk a little bit about your book, Living in a Mindful Universe. I know you spoke about the importance of this book, and it's kind of like a sequel to Proof of Heaven. And specifically when it comes to meditation, how can we access, if we have not encountered an NDE ourselves? How do you access like these meditative states that allow you to kind of become connected to all that is? Perhaps you could break it down for us.
Well, it turns out that the work that my life partner and the co author of that book, Living in a Mindful Universe, Karen Newell, the work we do and have done for the last many years, almost a decade now, involves meditation workshops where we use a form of binaural beat brainwave entrainment to help people get into deep meditative states. And that's all through what's called Sacred Acoustics. That's the name of her company. People can learn a lot more at sacredacoustics.com. And we discuss in a lot of detail in the book, Living in a Mindful Universe, how we practically use sacred acoustics tones. But basically, binaural beat brainwave entrainment is a way of influencing the lower brainstem to really set our consciousness free. And allow it to escape the sense of self, the sense of here and now, and liberate us into the same kind of space that we're in a near death or shared death experience, in that kind of a spiritual journey. And so using sacred acoustics, which influences the lower brainstem, and that's one of the reasons why it has so powerful an effect on liberating conscious awareness. This is where people are able to then cultivate and in many ways duplicate some of the major features of near death experiences. And specifically in our workshops, what we do is we take the NDE scale that was first developed by Bruce Grayson and others back in the early 1980s. It has 16 different elements of the kinds of things you can encounter in a near death experience, and offers a ability to score NDEs with a score going up to 32, with anything above 7 being a true NDE. My NDE scores at around a 28 or 29 out of 32. But the reality is, by using those specific features of that scale in a directed fashion in a meditation workshop, you can help people cultivate those various elements of the NDE through a meditative experience. And we encourage people to meditate on a daily, weekly, regular basis. And I can tell you, I've been using Sacred Acoustics daily, an hour or two, for more than a decade now. And it's a very profound way of kind of connecting with higher soul, connecting with souls of departed loved ones, and really coming into a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in one's own life, seeking creativity, guidance, wisdom, and insight. I mean, these are all things that evolve naturally from this process of going within. When you realize that most of what we do in our normal waking consciousness is have this little dance where we're listening to that voice in our head. Well, the voice in your head is not who you are. The voice in your head is not the magic of consciousness. I love how in his book, The Untethered Soul, Michael Singer calls that voice in your head your annoying roommate. That is the deeper truth. And so in meditation, what we can do is put that annoying roommate, the little ego voice in our heads, into timeout. And we can start to explore consciousness in a much richer and more powerful fashion by just riding the tones, the binaural beats. And what they're doing, those tones are influencing our lower brainstem to really liberate us from that here, now, and sense of self in very powerful ways. And the more we do that kind of thing, the more we can contribute to our own health and to the healing of others and to this world at large.
Wow. Okay, so Sacred Acoustics, and I will check that out, and we'll include that in the show notes as well. Dr. Eben, we're actually coming towards time. I wanted to understand, like, how you saw the pandemic shift your perspective, or you've noticed other people's perspectives shift when it comes to connecting with themselves and connecting with others.
Well, I think the pandemic has presented a beautiful opportunity for growth. One of the things that I've noted and reported on ever since my NDE is that the hardships and difficulties and challenges in life are a gift. And it's how we respond to these challenges that determines how much we're able to undergo soul growth and to improve and transform ourselves to the souls we truly came here to be. And I think that's one of the most profound lessons. And that's why the pandemic itself, in many ways, kind of challenged us. In many ways, kind of split us apart. We were into forced isolation, very challenging for many people to learn how to deal with that. But also, it exposed a lot of kind of weaknesses in our society, in our healthcare system. We've seen the kind of polarization of politics and how politics can be used to weaponize information. And sadly, that's exactly what we've seen happen in this world. And yet, in many ways, I think our kind of struggling and wrestling with these issues and coming out on the other side of it in terms of our dealing with social media, Twitter, and all those kind of things, dealing with the challenge of a virus that threatens our health and that kills off, millions of human beings. These are all opportunities for growth. And what I've seen is more of a coming together and understanding of our potential. And for example, what we saw early on in the pandemic was when humans stopped going around the world and flying jets and driving their cars and running their industries, how very quickly the waters and the air seemed to kind of clear up. I remember a report out in Nepal where somebody said for the first time in their life, they could actually see the mountains north of Kathmandu, which had been obscured by air pollution for some time. Likewise, the waters of Venice, you could see the fish again. So it's a lesson in how, if we'll calm down and back off and not be so aggressive about trying to rip every resource out of this planet until there's nothing left to rip, but let's go more for a sustainable mode of interaction. We can do a lot of things on the internet, a lot of connectivity there. We can do a lot of food procurement and other things like that locally. And that's where I think the pandemic is kind of forcing us in many ways to adopt different ways of addressing some of these problems and finding that we can often come up with beautiful solutions when we're just reminded that we don't have to behave like pure materialists, falsely separated from the universe, and just rip everything we can from the world around us, but in fact can live in sustainable harmony with this world. And that's where I think many of the lessons of the pandemic are coming to the fore, that we can realize that we really don't need to be flying jets everywhere and commuting to an office to work every day, when all we're doing is cursing future generations. In fact, cursing this generation with our addiction to fossil fuels, carbon dioxide buildup, planet warming, climate changing. And it's really almost irreversible now. If we don't take charge of this planet and take a much deeper responsibility for stewardship of this planet and quit our addiction to fossil fuels, quit our addiction to burning carbon fuels in general and generating plastic pollution, the world will start to become a far better place. So I
Yes.
think there are deep lessons in the pandemic around all these issues. And what we really need to do is start being better stewards of the planet.
Mm. Yes, I could not agree more. Dr. Eben, what sort of things have surprised you the most on your journey looking back? I mean, it's also so interesting that you were a neurosurgeon and, the coincidence of your journey and the NDE, given the perspective that you've been given. I had Dr. Jill Bolt-Taylor on the show about a year ago. And also I thought, what is the coincidence of that?
What I would say is, first of all, I don't call them coincidences, I call them synchronicities.
Hmm.
And that's much more an acknowledgement that they are kind of a nudge and wink from the universe about a deeper understanding of our connection with the universe when these kind of things happen. Now, the other thing I'll point out, though, is a near-death experience is always first and foremost tailored to the individual soul that goes through it. And so when I look back on my experience, even though I never could have predicted this course of events, 15 and 20 years ago, and looking forward in my life, it all makes perfect sense now how it all occurred. And the deep lessons of my NDE were exactly what of someone like me. I was adopted, therefore I had an abandonment wound and uh, struggled with a sense of whether I was worthy of love from the universe and things like that. Those are all deep topics of my own personal journey, but also the issues of consciousness, the mind-brain relationship, and understanding of them was greatly clarified through this experience. And that's where it's so important, as I said earlier, if people have a medical education, they can far more appreciate my journey. And it's important to point out that I've just put out the 10th anniversary edition of the book Proof of Heaven. And in that book, there are 36 additional new pages. And those pages are very important because they really tell the story of what all has happened since Proof of Heaven first came out, and especially with the scientific community, with the case report, with these different groups around the world who are realizing that consciousness is primary in the universe, and they're developing the experiments and the scientific pursuit to more further elaborate that whole process. But that 10th anniversary edition of Proof of Heaven is now out there, and it has a lot of this additional information that can help people get on board with this revolution in scientific understanding. And that's where I think the world can grow up tremendously, and all of us can come into some healing and wholeness around the various conditions that this kind of understanding of primacy of consciousness and the reality of our free will in coming and driving and manifesting the world of our dreams, of our ideals, is one that is within our reach. And that, I think, is the most important lesson of much of this kind of scientific elaboration of the nature of the mind-brain relationship, the nature of reality, because it's very optimistic and hopeful in where it leads us.
Mhm.
And that's where I think this world could certainly use some of that kind of information and understanding to help it deal with a horrific kind of polarization, conflict, and confusion that we're manifesting today. There is a pathway forward that involves a union of science and spirituality that will be revolutionary in healing this world.
So, to wrap things up, Dr. Eben, what do you want to tell our listeners about their health, wellness, well-being, given all the information that you have had on NDEs and also reincarnation and all these kind of concepts? What would be your main takeaway? Like, what do you want to tell our listeners to do right after this call?
I think the
Yeah.
main takeaway is that you have far more power than you might realize in influencing your life and the evolution of this world at large. And as long as you hold that love in your heart, love for others, compassion, kindness, a sense of acceptance, the sense of forgiveness when necessary, and never forget gratitude for every breath. These are the tools that can help us to grow much more fully into the souls we came here to be. And that binding force of love is very important. And it's a love the universe has for us and that we can serve as a conduit for. Like I, in meditation, will often use that sense of divine love that I can manifest to bring that love from the core of the universe out into all of my dealings with my fellow beings and with the universe at large.
Hmm.
And I think that kind of path of prayer and meditation, especially combined with the knowledge that we can change this world, and we can, that world of our dreams, that world of ideals, is one that is within our reach when we just realize how powerful we are and start exploring that through meditation, centering prayer, and then bringing that action of what we discover in those processes of exploring within, bring that to this world at large in our daily activities and in the way we choose purpose and meaning in our life. And that's where we can really start to grow into the souls we came here to be and rescue this world from the oblivion that is promised by the false sense of separation inherent in the conventional materialist thought.
Wow. Dr. Eben, thank you so much for your time. Are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you, about your work? I know you mentioned a couple different websites. If you could mention them all here, that'd be great.
Yes. Well, first of all, is Eben, EBEN Alexander.com. And I have a reading list there, FAQ that's very important for people with questions about my experience, and also blog postings that cover a lot of this material over time. That reading list is extremely valuable to explore. Much of it is hot links to the actual papers involved. So I encourage people to visit there. Also, go to sacredacoustics.com to learn more about meditation. You can get a free 20-minute Om file, listen through headphones, follow some of the instructions on the sacredacoustics.com website, and you can learn a lot more about how to meditate much more effectively and to bring those gifts into your life. Also, there's a site, Inner Sanctum Center. That's INNER Sanctum Center, which is a site that Karen and I developed. It was really through Karen's wisdom. It involved a whole set of interviews we did during the pandemic every 2 weeks with many of the people that we would have been seeing out in the world at the meetings and conferences and presentations. But because of COVID, everything was shut down. And so Karen and I took that opportunity to interview some of the leading thought leaders on earth around consciousness and the brain-mind connection. And those interviews are available for free at INNER sanctumcenter.com. Also at ebenalexander.com, there's a 33-day journey. When you get to ebenalexander.com, there's a banner that will invite you to leave your first name and email address. And if you do so, you'll be involved in a 33-day email drip campaign where every day for 33 days, you'll get one of the major concepts emailed to you, concepts out of our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. And the best thing about it is more than 10,000 people have now taken that 33-day journey course. And many of them from all around the world have left their own experiences and helped each other in the communities that have formed on those 33 pages. So it becomes a very rich resource for people wanting to learn more about all of this.
Wow. Amazing. And where can we sign up for those 33 days?
If you go to ebenalexander.com, you'll find right there an invitation on the landing page, your 33-day journey into the heart of consciousness.
Amazing.
And that's where you put in your name and email address. And that's where you take off on an incredible journey of discovery. All of that is free. So we really want to get this out to the world. In fact, for the Sacred Acoustics, Karen, there was a pilot study that confirmed the usefulness of Sacred Acoustics in alleviating anxiety in a busy Manhattan psychiatric practice, written up in the peer-reviewed medical literature in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in February of 2020. And in fact, that series of tones, which is called the Whole Mind Bundle, is available deeply discounted on sacredacoustics.com. That is the set of tones that were used in that scientific study. And because she was putting them out early in the pandemic and she knew people were involved in the financial upheaval of the pandemic, she decided to make a free option for that Whole Mind Bundle. So if you go to sacredacoustics.com, you can find that all those tones are available to you. If you can pay I think it's $19 fine. If you're in financial hardship right now, Karen and Sacred Acoustics are kind enough to still be offering the Whole Mind Bundle with a free option. So we just wanted people to be able to access these techniques for deep relaxation when they were especially challenged during the COVID pandemic and during our very chaotic times.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll include those in the show notes. And for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about proof of heaven and near-death experiences from neurosurgeon Dr. Eben Alexander. And you can tune into Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and higher consciousness. Thank you so much.